Good evening and welcome to the UpSet podcast. Tonight we're talking about law and order or disorder. Coming up next. Hello. Once again, thank you for joining us here on the UpSet podcast. We are so happy that you chose to spend your Sunday evening with us. And of course, I would never show up here by myself when I have these lovely people to hang out with. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Never show up alone.
No.
One day when she does that, we ought to all leave, right?
You're like, hey, what happened?
That would be funny.
Hey, so yeah. Happy Black History Month.
Yes,
I
thank you.
forgot to change my background, but I'll have it for next week. Yes, happy Black History
Celebrate
Month.
it publicly while we can.
That's right. You know, we always say this is the shortest month of the year, so we got to squeeze as much out of each day, celebrating our history as possible. And, 365 days really is where it's at anyway.
We should have Black History Year, of course.
Absolutely.
In our power to do so.
Hey, people. Hello, Mary. Good evening to you. Hello, Miss Sharon. Hello, Miss Vita. That's right. Happy Black History Month. That's right. So how are you guys celebrating Black History?
I'm going to go ahead. I decided to continue being Black.
I'm with you, Tally. I'm into that, too.
Yeah, I heard someone say this is going to be their blackest Black History Month ever. I'm like, okay, let's see it. Let's see what it looks like. All right. Hello, Mike Williams. Thanks for being here with us. But Charles, you said you were going to share something with us about Black History.
Whenever Black History, month comes along, there are a lot of, news and podcasters, independent journalists start posting, little bits and pieces about Black history. One that caught my eye was the story about an enslaved African named James Robinson. He was, I'd say, I don't know, use the proper word. He was encouraged to fight in two wars for the United States. It was the American Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. Each time he was promised, because he was enlisted as an enslaved African. So both times the commanding officers in both wars promised him that if he fought and fought successfully, and if they won, that he would be free. He was not in both occasions. When the wars were over and he fought gallantly, they sold him back into slavery.
Oh, my
Jeez.
God.
That was,
Oh, my word.
and the thing is, between the wars, the first war, he was sold back to his original enslaver, and of course went through the same thing that African slaves went through. They were brutally beaten and treated very poorly. After that, you would think, okay, look, I'm not going to trust anybody saying you'll be free if you fight the war. He then was brought into the War of 1812 with the same promises. You fight, we win, you're free. Not so.
Oh, my goodness.
So I wanted to, kind of bring his name up because sometimes, there are people that have, suffered a lot. They don't get the big name. We have our typical, heroes of Black history.
Mhm.
But it's the first time I've heard
I
of
like
James
that.
Robinson as a soldier in two wars and was denied freedom. So I just thought I
No, thanks for highlighting that. I
You
think
said
we
his
should
name was Nate Robinson. What was the name?
James Robinson.
James Robinson. Okay.
James Robinson.
Nate was his second cousin, once removed on his mother's side.
And he lived, by the
Ever
way, he did
freed,
live to
Chuck? Was
by the
he
way,
ever
he did
freed like years later?
years later. Yeah. He lived to be 115.
Wow.
Wow.
And
Wow, that's
Man,
even
that's-
more
Tell me
remarkable.
after
Took 2
100
wars.
he was freed.
He
Does
was
it say
birthed-
what age he was when he was freed?
No,
Yeah, we
the
all got to look up.
article does not talk about that. Let's see if there's a Robinson contributions are fully recognized by at his gravesite. They fully recognized his heroism and dedication at Elmwood Cemetery. And
That
he
is
did
death.
receive military honors after the fact, of course. But during that time, when he was young enough and fit enough to fight in 2 wars, he was denied freedom, and that to me is the atrocity.
Right.
Mhm.
Wow.
The breaking of truces and promises made and not kept is a part of the ongoing legacy of the United States of America. It's something that we recognize it. I mean, native populations have written books about it.
Yeah.
Countries around the nation, around the world, around the globe that we promise things to. Our promises are only as good as the circumstances in which we make them, and then we tend to change them.
And we'll take the disgusting treatment even while fighting for a country. Well, it was interesting, the Revolutionary War, they asked him to fight because America was looking for its freedom.
Right.
That'd be interesting.
And denying him his.
And denied him his. But we have some other, stories. I mean, there's, my goodness, there are the Tuskegee Airmen.
Oh yeah.
Had nearly a perfect record as aviators during the war. Buffalo Soldiers. I mean, it just goes on and on. I think it would behoove us during this month to, personally do some research. Parents, sit down with your children and go over the accurate stories of the achievements of African Americans, before the freedom of America, and even before America. There's a story to tell of enslavement in Africa. So yeah, it's a huge story, and unfortunately, when we grew up in school, I went to public schools. A lot of the things we learn now, we were never taught in school.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah. And, one of the things someone else mentioned, and I know you're not saying this, Charles, there's a lot of times when we think about Black history, we automatically go to slavery or, we talk about those things. And they were saying, or not they were saying, but it reminds me that we also have history that doesn't involve that we should share as well, so that we aren't always defining ourselves as that the only part of our history. So
Especially innovation and
Right.
how many Black people created so many things
Right.
that they don't get credit for either.
Right. True.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe
to
we'll
mention
do that. Highlight some.
The large number of Black people today who are not descendants of American slavery. I mean, Miguel, your folks aren't descended from American slavery, are they?
No. So my mom is from French island of Guadeloupe. My dad's from Dominica.
Okay.
So I'm first generation American.
GP, your folks are not descended from American slavery, are they?
Unless you can prove that there were no slaves in Haiti working on the sugarcane plantations.
Oh, no, I mean, yeah, they may be,
American slaves.
That connection, yeah, but so I mean, it is the experience is different, and we have to respect the difference. I remember the tensions that used to exist, and in some cases still do, between African Americans and other Africans or other members of the African diaspora who were not descended from African slaves, as though somehow or another they were our enemy. And we're just learning now how to how to bond according to our commonality, and that's important.
I think some of
Unfortunately,
that comes. I'm sorry.
Go
well, I was
ahead.
going to say, unfortunately, Tally, on the interwebs, the conversation has reverted back
Is it back
to yeah. So there was a during COVID, there was a movement for, I think it's ADOS. I know that's the acronym, American Descendants of Slave or something like that, or African Descendants. So pretty much to protect the African Americans versus various
Other groups.
other groups. Um, there was a fierce movement against that. There was a conversation a few years ago about the origins of hip hop, because stories have been told about the Puerto Rican influence on hip hop, or the Jamaican influence on hip hop, and a lot of folks felt insulted, by everyone's desire to have an imprint on hip hop, where, of course, it originates in the Bronx, which honestly, it's a multipod of all kinds of nationalities. So
Yeah.
it's an ongoing conversation. It kind of resurrected during COVID. So we're back there now.
Mercy.
I wanted to ask Tally, because I think he would know, and he'd get a kick out of his statement. I want to throw a wrench into the discussion, because we use the term African American, Black, colored, whatever. But technically, would you say that Elon Musk is a African American?
Technically, yes.
Yeah, okay. No, I was just wondering.
An African American of Dutch descent. When he gave that Hitler salute during the inauguration, I just about had enough. But yeah, I mean, that's at one of our churches recently. The pastor called, for people of African descent to come. He wanted to meet with them specially. And several white people came down and they said, we're from South Africa, mate.
Mhm.
And I mean, nowadays, what it used to mean don't mean what it means now.
Right.
Urban doesn't mean
Especially
urban.
literally, yeah.
Mhm. And African American, you might end up with anybody. So, and nowadays, I really do think that race itself is taking a backseat to ideology and class.
You're right.
Ooh.
Absolutely.
That's a good discussion right there. That's good.
I mean,
Before we jump into our conversation this evening, obviously this week has just been one for the books as it relates to tragedy. I know it was it Tuesday that we were,
Tuesday or Wednesday.
Wednesday.
When was it? Okay.
Wednesday.
When we heard about the collision with the Black Hawk helicopter and the flight going into the Reagan Airport. And I don't know about you guys, but when I see stuff like that, I become like, I get locked in, like probably like I just kept watching news report after news. It's like I needed to do that in order for it to register that this really happened. And I just became invested in who are the people, what happened.
Yeah.
I was just getting this deep dive because it's just, I don't know how to process things like that when they happen, other than to just.
I think it would have been even more tragic had that collision occurred over a residential area.
It was over the Potomac. I just kept thinking they were just so close. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I saw something where they had already pretty much declared it has landed. Like,
Oh,
or
sure.
that it was, that it was going to be 6 minutes early. And I've seen so much stuff like, oh, what if it wasn't 6 minutes early? And I'm like, okay, are we going too far with this? Like 6 minutes could have made a difference.
Yeah.
And, all of that stuff. It's like,
My heart was broken when I saw the passengers that were on that flight.
I was broken even before I knew who the people was. I mean, just the visualization. And my nephew is an aviation mechanic for American, so I'm, texting him, "Is it true? Is it true?" And he says, "Yes, Marlene, it's true." And it just broke my heart because I mean, many of us fly all the time, right? And you're thinking about when you're approaching landing, how you're just Really,
Yeah,
just
you feel like you're you're in the clear now. Like you can relax.
lights right of the city. You're just
Mm.
waiting to land. And my thought was, what were the people thinking when it
Mm.
happened so quickly? Just that impact, and then the explosion right after. And I just pray that they died quickly, before
Mhm.
all of that happened. And then no, I mean, every flight, they're children, right? They're always children on it. And then
Mhm.
find out
Figure
so many
skating.
children.
I mean, but the insult that was added to the horror
Oh.
Yeah.
was the response of the president of the United States, who stood upon the broken bodies and the spilt blood of these innocent victims and began to promote his agenda as though it was fact. My understanding now is that the word had reached the White House that the pilot of the Black Hawk was a transgendered
Oh my goodness.
female, and that's still circulating out there. That it was a transgendered female who was the pilot of the, and it is not, it is being confirmed as being not true. But even if it were, I mean,
Mhm.
for
You
him,
use that as
to use it to point blame and to cast aspersions, and then to
Yeah,
be
he
on
also
live television at noon, and then use a profane word, referring to Pete Buttigieg and talking about his BS, and he didn't say BS on live television from the White House in the press room.
Mm.
It
Yes.
was profanity, and nobody's called him on it. Nobody's called him on it.
They let
He
them do
also
anything.
implied that the air traffic control tower was less than prepared because of DEI.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's just total speculation. And
Yeah,
I've heard stories where they said, well, they were overwhelmed in the tower because they only had one person working, and none of that's true.
no.
Yeah.
None of
I
that.
I listened to I don't know
Several
how
air
many of you
traffic
listened
controllers working.
to the recordings.
Mhm.
And
Are the
a lot of
recordings posted?
Yeah.
yeah,
Black Box?
you can hear the dialogue between
Mhm.
the pilots and air traffic control. And um obviously I looked at a few theories, and one of the ones I feel I'm leaning more towards is the pilot in the helicopter. There was a plane right behind the one,
Tracking
and that
the plane.
Mhm.
right, that he was looking at the other plane, assuming that he could visually see that one. So when the person asked for confirmation that you can see like approval for visual something,
Right.
and he really thought that was what it was, and it was before he realized that it was too close. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Tally. Like when I listened to that, those comments, I was like, what is your point here? Like, how is this providing any relief or sensitivity to the situation and the matter involved and the
He
victims
just
at this time?
always creates division. No matter what, there's always division. There's always negativity all the time. And
Yeah,
you
I
would
was,
do that in the midst of tragedy. And DEI includes all of us.
Yeah.
yeah,
And so when
yeah,
you're saying we don't have brains, our intellect is not the same, I'm insulted because you tried to act like God didn't make my brain like the next person, So it was
yeah,
female gender, people of color, disabilities, sexual orientation, or however you want to describe that. He was talking about all of that.
yeah. But to use that
None of us.
tragedy to do that, so sad, so
Yeah.
sad. And then most recently, Friday with the plane, meta was it
Helicopter.
for
Mhm.
medical helicopter in
Medical-
Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I mean not plane. I mean helicopter
Yeah, it
plane.
was a
Yes,
Learjet,
Learjet.
medevac
Medevac.
aircraft.
That's what. Okay, yes, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah. Seeing that, I was like, this can't be true. And I'm like this doesn't happen twice in 1 week. Like I'm like, this can't be true. But then once again, I saw the news reports, and just knowing how many times I've been right on Roosevelt Boulevard and Cotton, like that same street.
Mhm.
It's just like
Was it on Roosevelt? I didn't know where
Ro-
it occurred.
Roosevelt and
Oh,
Cotman.
yeah. one
Yeah.
of the busiest intersections
Exactly.
Yep.
the
What?
city has.
Very busy.
100 feet difference in any direction would have gone. That would have gone from a tragedy to a horrendous disaster. 100 feet in any direction, because
Because of
right
the
across the street was a huge shopping center,
right.
Mhm.
and then
That's
in the other
hard.
direction is a huge residential area. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a classmate from Oakwood who just posted that his little cousin was hit by some of the debris. So he's, you know,
someone else, Dwayne Hamilton was mentioning that.
mm,
So
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen like some videos for, looking at, they were
it's a
circling the
lot.
videos over and over. Yeah.
It's
It
a
was
lot.
like
It's a
the
lot.
ring
Yeah.
cameras, the people in the drive through,
Mhm.
just seeing the different angles. It was like, wow, can you imagine just going about your business on a regular Friday evening, and all of a sudden there's this, I don't know.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out to the first responders and
Absolutely.
police department. I happen to have a police scanner, so I dialed in Philadelphia police. You have no idea what they have to go through,
I don't.
and the responses and coordination and setting up a command center. I mean, the radio was popping. These people had to jump
Spring
into
in
action
action.
immediately.
Yeah. They don't have time to be frenzied like the rest of us. Like, oh my God.
Mhm.
As soon as they go
So
right into
shout
it.
out to them and all of the first responders and rescue workers that had to go, because even they had to respond, even not fully knowing that the tragedy was not over. That there could have been other secondary explosions and secondary
Mhm.
things going on, but they had to rush in and do their job. So, a shout out for that.
just a brief word before we switch gears and go into our main topic. You remember when we did the program on the anxious generation, and it talked about there's something being noted about the way we cover news. I mean, I imagine all of us have seen at least 10 images of those crashes. The human brain normally replays things. That's what trauma does. You go through something, and the human brain replays it for you, because what it's trying to do is to help you become accustomed to it and adjust it to it. But now the human brain has to give way to the news continually replaying things, creating an externalized trauma that is affecting us in ways that we don't understand.
It's
And,
true.
and we've got to become aware that we are being re-traumatized by
Yeah.
news.
It's true.
Yeah, I saw a posting by an aviator, a veteran airline pilot, and he posted, of course, what he thought happened, but he spent most of his time ensuring the public that airline travel was safe.
Yeah.
Because he's been getting texts from not only friends and family, and they're concerned now about aviation safety, so forth and so on. So he spent a lot of time ensuring people. You have to consider the fact, I don't believe we had an aviation tragedy in this country in a couple of decades.
20 years,
Yeah.
So
aviation is still by far
safer than driving.
However,
when it does.
when it does. And the thing that really gets you about aviation is this: it is completely out of your control. Strapped in that seat, putting your head between your legs, kissing your rear end goodbye. If you're in the car, you can get out, walk around, and on a train you can jump down on the ground. But something happens and you're in the air, what are you going to do? And that feeling of helplessness is what makes people terrified.
Yeah.
And it brings you to a whole new appreciation. Marlene, you said you had a relative who works for the airline. He's a mechanic. It gives you a whole new appreciation for what those people do. They will not let an aircraft leave the ground.
That's right.
If there's one thing wrong,
simple thing, Chuck.
They will
as inconvenient as it may be.
Thank God for every delay.
Yeah.
So
If
yesterday,
the door handle is not working, the plane can't take off.
So yesterday I flew from Honolulu to New York and then New York to Virginia. And when I got home, there was an article about a United Airlines airplane that caught on fire before it took off. And because I flew United Airlines, I was just like, that could have been our plane. You know, sometimes things happen. but thank God they caught it before they took off.
Yeah.
And that would have been tragic for it to catch fire 30,000 over. So
I don't appreciate the fact that GP found a way to
Talk about it.
No,
Talk about
while we were schlepping around freezing in Philly,
somebody had to do it.
and he was flying in from Hawaii. I mean, that was well placed, but I just want you to know I caught that.
Talk about it.
Well, for
But I
sure.
think there was another some type of plane crash yesterday, because one of my church members was saying that the plane went down. I don't know if it was in California, but it was somewhere, I think West Coast, and 2 people passed there. So
Oh, wow, I didn't hear about that one.
all of a sudden it
Was
seized.
that a commercial airline or was it a
No,
private?
it was
No, I don't think it was
private.
commercial, because you would have heard
Probably
that.
private, yeah. What is
Well,
happening?
there's less regulation for private planes. The commercial planes are heavily regulated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Let me ask you guys a
again,
question.
It just makes you appreciate how highly trained and experienced these pilots are.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the amount of pressure.
With all the news cycles that we're dealing with, how are you guys maintaining a sense of peace, or are you able to? Because I find myself disconnecting for this reason, especially if I see things kind of cycling through, especially the conspiracy theorists start coming out. I disconnect for a moment, allow things to die down, then I start sifting through the facts. But how are you guys able to cope through these, executive orders, plane crashes, all of these things?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question.
I don't know about the rest of them, but I drink coconut water. Coconut water is really
Coconut water, you said.
What's that? Almond milk. Milk.
coconut water is it's just very hydrating. But yeah, but we are called upon to pray.
Yeah.
The denomination, the division has called for Pentecost 2025 as though we can schedule the Holy Ghost. But the fact of the matter is that we should be actively giving ourselves over to entering into prayer, not asking God for things, but just waiting before God and waiting in silence and opening our hearts for the influence of the Spirit beyond ourselves, so we can transcend ourselves. That's one of the things that I'm leaning more toward becoming a man who prays.
Yeah, and ditto that, and just staying in the Word of God that brings us peace, and praying for those who are going through, because they need a lot of prayer, a lot of support. And if it's, I don't know what I can do to help them, but certainly my prayers are for them, and encouraging corporate prayer for them.
Yeah, I have the tendency, when I don't want to deal with how something's affecting me emotionally, I push it aside, and I almost to the point that I try to forget that it happened or it's happening, and I'm trying not. I don't think that's healthy.
That's right.
So, and that's one of the reasons why I make myself look at what's happening, read the report, absorb it, feel it, allow myself to feel it. But I also stop myself before it gets into that cycle that Tally was talking about, where you're just constantly, obsessed over what's happening. But I had a conversation with God about all of this. I'm like, Lord, what's really happening? And I know that you do not want your children to live in a state of fear. He's not given us a spirit of fear. And so with that being said, how do I process all of this? And it just takes me back to what I was saying, prayer, recognizing life can be short. You don't know what the next moment is. So to me, it's giving me perspective. I look at it as a perspective of, I don't know what's going to happen when I walk outside every day. However, I know how I want to live my life with such intentionality that should something happen to me, I'm okay with it. That's kind of been my mentality. I don't want to live in fear of death or tragedy happening.
And you don't want to become apathetic either.
Right.
It's just a plane crash. Or just
exactly.
when, there are people, whose lives are affected. And so, most of us are pastors right here, and y'all too are, pastors, incognito. But, we know tragedy, and we've seen it so many. I mean, if we counted the number of funerals we've had to do,
Oh yeah.
over and over, and especially what was that, 2020 through 2023,
Oh,
sure,
pandemic
one
years.
right after the
Yeah.
other. I mean, it was devastating to us, and an emotional breakdown. I know I did so many funerals; it was ridiculous. And so, I'm just so grateful that we know God. We
Yeah.
know that we have someone that we can go to, and we don't have to drink. We don't have to turn to drugs, or anything like
That's
that.
coconut water.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Tally.
Yeah, that's a coconut. Like a friend of mine once said, life is like Kevin Hart. It's short and sometimes it's funny.
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah. But no, it's a good question, Miguel. I think that's what a lot of people are trying to figure out. What do I do with all of this? How do I manage my emotions regarding it? Go ahead, Charles.
And I'm sorry.
Sharon Howard mentioned in she asked the question in the chat, how do we help our youth make adjustments? How do we, address our young people when they ask questions or they see tragedies like this? How do we handle that as parents and as other, supporting adults? Because young people have a different perspective than we do. And of course, in today's society, a lot of the games that they play, a lot of the movies that we watch, there's death happening all the time. I mean,
Right.
it's fake, of course, it's Hollywood, but still they see people dying on the screen, silver screen, or maybe in a video game. But when it actually happens,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Gross.
Yeah.
And with that, they get confused, and not just young people, but older people too. They get confused concerning the thought of God. Like, why would God do that? Why would He allow that to happen? To the point where is He really for me? Should I really be into God? And it becomes a sad thing. In us as pastors, we have to address that, tell people to understand who God really is, and what He does not do, right? And why tragedy occurs, and so all those things are very important that we educate people.
Absolutely. Speaking of educating people, I know there's been so much going on this week. There's so much to talk about. And speaking of so much to talk about, a lot of the news this week, at least for me and my news feed, have started with the word Trump signs or Trump knew this, knew that. We've seen a lot of things rolling out of the president's office this week, and just in my circles alone, I've seen a lot of people responding to the impact some of these executive orders and other proclamations have had or are having on them, whether it is immigration, whether it's being a federal worker and not knowing what to do in terms of these bios. So we wanted to take some time this evening to talk about some of these recent orders and things that have come out of the office and how it's impacting our communities and how we're processing all of them. So for those who are like, what are all of these? Because, some of them you see in the headlines, they get a lot of fodder. And there are other ones that are not as widely publicized, but are still just as important to know. So if you're interested in a list, I mean, definitely, actually, as a matter of fact, I'll put a link on YouTube and Facebook and this was as of the other day. And this is the public radio that put out, the NPR that put out the full list of the executive orders that Trump has signed in the first week of being in office. And so I want us to talk about them. So let me ask this so we can kind of figure out which ones we want to really highlight. Of the ones that he has signed, which ones do you feel, or which one do you feel has gotten the most reaction so far?
Immigration. DEI.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
DEI too.
DEI. Sorry. All right. So let's start with
the defunding the defunding of aid.
The grant funding,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Right. That was massively affected.
Well, they actually rescinded that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did.
After a while. Yeah. A lot of backlash first.
Yeah.
All right, I just want to make sure I put that in the chat. Okay, so let's talk about DEI first.
Mhm.
So I wanted to read exactly what, just so we're clear on that. The DEI, here we go. I know they showed some, here it is. Ending what they consider radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. So, as a result of this, the director of the Office of Management and Budget and other agencies are directed to terminate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the federal government. Agencies must report to the OMB director of a list of all employees in DEI and environmental justice positions, as well as related committees, programs, activities, services, and budgets. And this all must take place within 60 days.
Mhm.
Okay. What does this all mean?
That we did a show on DEI.
Right.
DEI grew out of the backlash from the George Floyd murder. When the nation watched a person operating under the color of law take a black man's life with a level of impunity and insouciance that they were shocked, and they said, we got to do something. And all of a sudden, all around the country, people were coming up with measures to assertively pursue equity and inclusion and diversity. There are some individuals who are part of the dominant population of this country, white people, not white males, but white people, who felt that somehow or another some of their privileges were being eroded, and they began to push back, but slowly. But Donald Trump and his minions decided that DEI was a horror, and they decided in Project 2025, they said they were going to get rid of it. You need to recognize that this nation voted this man in, knowing that that's what he was going to do. And so what it does now, it rolls back on the affirming action being taken in corporate America and public life and government, that was to certify that there would be equitable opportunities for people who had been traditionally disenfranchised. Now those programs are being absolutely squashed, killed, rolled away. I know 2 DEI executives who've lost their jobs in the last year.
And that's what I was going to say, that the direct impact we're seeing is a lot of people who were put into these positions at various institutions and entities are now almost, they've been served their papers.
And who were qualified.
Yeah. And we're doing a great job. And we're doing a great job.
Skin color. Yeah.
Because one of the things people don't realize, I think, about DEI is that it's not just race. Because some people think it's just to allow Black people to get jobs. There are other women, as we mentioned, people with
primary beneficiaries of DEI are white women, and affirmative action as well.
Yes,
primary beneficiaries are white women.
Yeah, and so you'll hear white women say, like, it's like, I don't understand. Like, is it ignorance, or is it just like you
would allow yourself to be oppressed?
You don't even understand you're talking about yourself when you're speaking against certain things. But anyway, and just seeing how people are being handed pink slips, and some of them are surprised because they're thinking that they're, absolved from this affecting them in any way. And it's just really sad to see. And a lot of people are kind of nervous now about what will this mean for them? What will this mean for, our people, our young people graduating from college and looking for opportunities and feeling like, the world is already against them. And now the programs that were helping them to get opportunities are no longer available to them. It's just.
And shame on us, Tasha, for acting as if that's a negative thing for people of color, right? Because I've heard comments, on social media and TV, of people feeling like, I don't need that to get a job, and you don't understand how people will oppress you just because they will shut doors in your face because they would rather have another door open for someone else or themselves. And so they don't give you the opportunity. It was the same thing as when Dr. King was fighting for affirmative action, same principle, let the people come to the table, right? We're not saying to bypass, just bypass us because, in other words, we have the education, right? We're not asking you to hire anyone who doesn't have the education or the experience, but let us come to the table. And you know how some people will take this and go even farther, to the point where, we might have the education and experience and have to do lower jobs, right? Because they now want to preserve it for themselves. Remember when, Tally, you and Chuck are old enough to remember how
Very much.
a lot, a
Yeah.
lot of people, listen,
Hey, Chuck,
a
I
lot of
recommend
people
a
were,
good coffin for you.
I do. Yeah, I remember the
Soon
covered
finish with
wagon.
using it.
but listen, you remember how people were hired, of other races, right? They could be hired from family members and things like that. Just letting a good person come in, no education, and man, they soar high in the company. They become executives and everything like that, and they don't even have the education behind it. But somebody gave them just an opportunity, and so you can come in with education and still not be hired. And we're returning back to those type of circumstances.
Right. Let's talk about another one because I know you all mentioned immigration. And so there are a couple of them. One, securing our borders. This executive order proposes a joint state and federal effort to cease and prevent future immigration at the southern border. Trump orders agencies to construct a physical barrier, deploy federal law enforcement personnel to the southern border, and aggressively pursue criminal prosecutors for those who violate the law while in the United States. And then in addition to that, in this lengthy executive order, Trump calls for this is protecting the American people against invasion. Trump calls for immediate removal of those in the United States without legal status. He orders agencies to enforce removal orders, criminalize unauthorized entry into the United States, extend the Department of Homeland Security's presence in all 50 states, and construct detention facilities for those awaiting removal proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
The order also calls for civil fines in addition to removal and cuts federal funding from sanctuary jurisdictions.
That would be Philadelphia. That would be New York. That would be major cities around this country. What people, and these things have been worked on for a while. And the documentation and the verbiage that you see here is heavily researched. By being able to talk about this being an alien invasion, it empowers the president to assume powers that he would not ordinarily have because, quote, the nation is under attack.
Right.
And so by referring to it as an invasion and so forth, it broadens his executive powers and it allows him to utilize the military in a way that he ordinarily could not. The military is not to be used internally, especially when its own citizens are at risk of being involved. But this is the president using language to allow himself to rule by fiat. He said he was going to do it, and he is doing it. Now, one of the things I noticed, because they had a raid here in the city of Philadelphia at a car wash place that I know about. And most of the people, when you go to these car wash places, typically you're seeing Latinos or African immigrants. And I noticed that there are car wash places up in the northeast where they have Russian immigrants. No raid there.
Mm.
When it comes
targeted,
down to it, Europeans account for about 10% of the immigrant population in the United States, but they do not account for anywhere near that when it comes to deportations. And this is a xenophobic, racist attempt to whiten America. And we need to call this out. Recently the regional conference presidents and another office, Southeastern Conference, they they wrote this beautiful letter about the compassion they have towards people who are suffering and all of that, without calling out the cause of the suffering and saying, for those who are immigrants and being discomforted, we're praying for you, and here's what you need to do. But that's not, that is not all that you have to do to be prophetic in these times. You have to do what Marianne Buddy did, the bishop down in Washington, the Episcopal bishop. You must call out. It's one thing to say, oh, gee, Charles, I'm so sorry that you don't have a home because it burnt down. Real justice doesn't just show comfort to him because he has no home. Real justice finds out who the arsonist is and makes that arsonist accountable. And this church must call out the responsible parties for creating this xenophobic position. And we are failing to do it because we are cowards. I now return you to your regularly scheduled podcast.
Now, when you say call out, Tally, what does that look like?
We should, instead of writing a letter saying we feel so badly for those who are being stressed because of their immigration status, and we're so sorry that you're confronting these things, and we have help for you. If you need a place to stay, we'll give you. No, what we need to say is that this government, the president of these United States and this administration, is unfairly acting in exact opposition of some of his religious supporters who know that we are to try to provide comfort for the stranger, and that xenophobia. And this is not new to the United States. Ben Franklin said way back in the 1700s, we got to be careful to not let these swarthy hordes come into our nation and pollute it. And he was talking about Germans, and then in the 1800s, the Chinese Exclusion Act, where Chester Arthur signed a law saying that Chinese people could not come into this country. We have done this again and again and again. And we need to label Donald John Trump and his minions as standing in the long line of legacy of hateful, xenophobic behavior and call it out for what it is.
So you're saying call it out by name, like
that gummit? Yes.
Yes. Okay. I just want to be clear.
I agree with Tally, but there is retaliation even within your own church, because they believe everything that this man says, and then I'm baffled because I'm baffled, and that's why you have to really share God's principles, because this injustice is against Jesus. How can you say you're Christian and you're for injustice? It's against Christ. And so I think we have to really also share who Jesus is and let people know this is not approved by him, right? It's not approved by God. And so speak the truth about it all so that they can see clearly.
You can do it in love. What Marianne Buddy did, Bishop Buddy did, was done in such an exquisite spirit of Christ.
Graceful.
I mean, it can be done in love. I mean,
it was so sweet.
It was. I mean, and it was so disarming that all the president could do was sit there and squirm, and J.D. Vance was trying to figure out how to get even. But it was done with such grace, and it can be done, and it needs to be done. And our church needs to say, we have said nothing about the death of upwards of 50,000 Gazans since conflict there. We said nothing about it.
Nothing.
We watch these things.
Well, on that, that kind of jogged my memory a little bit. I was happy to learn that ADRA finally made it into Gaza and was helping. If folk don't know what ADRA is, Adventist Disaster Relief Agency, because I always wondered. I said, ADRA is global, and they're always showing up in disaster areas and all of that. And I was a little heartwarming to see reported by Adventist News Network that ADRA, I guess during this pause or ceasefire, they were able to get workers into Gaza. So we do have a presence there, which was welcoming to learn that.
I want to affirm our hearts are in the right place. We have compassion for those who suffer. But justice is about making right the things that have gone wrong. That's what is meant by the psalm. Then I went into the sanctuary and I saw their end. When Asaph the psalmist says, I was worried about wicked spreading and worrying about all of the evil rising. He said, then I went into the sanctuary and saw the end. In other words, the sanctuary is the place where God makes right the things that have gone wrong. You have to call out sin categorically and specifically. You can't stand up and say, well, if anybody is discomforted and if somebody may have said something to hurt somebody's feelings, or no, you got to say the president of these United States is using the law as a hammer to beat down his enemies and to establish his own rule of self-seeking management. You have to say that.
So that brings up this question that David Gordon had.
One of the finest first elders in the conference, incidentally.
Since it is part of our culture not to speak about politics in the pulpit, how will our pastors who are leading Black congregations or even other congregations address these issues that are impactful to our community? Calling them out, like what you're saying, Tally. Should our pastors be doing that from the pulpit?
So I think there's a multitude of things that we need to do. First, we need to address some of the internal, I would say, theological barriers as to why our people are comfortable being on the sideline and silent until injustice shows up at our doorstep.
Right.
There is a level of cognitive dissonance in the way that we preach our last day message that teaches us that we should just simply be hands off and allow things to unfold. And it's self-centered and it's self-serving because the quicker these things can happen, the quicker I can go home. And so
exactly.
We've taken that position for it.
Yeah.
And this is not new. This is before I was born. Right. One of the things that I'm doing, we asked early in the question in the show about what are we doing for Black History Month. Oddly enough, I've been watching the dialogue surrounding Trump, and people are comparing him to the rise of Hitler. And for me, I'm questioning: was it hyperbole? Are we being exaggerated? Tally shaking no. And so one of the things that I noticed when I looked at how Adventists reacted to Nazi Germany. One of the things I noticed was that some of them were very much in favor of him because he aligned with our dietary, restrictions or dietary lifestyle. So there was an appeal to listen to him because he doesn't drink tea or he doesn't drink coffee, he doesn't eat meat. But he was the same one that imposed a mandatory military training day on Saturday. Right. And there was no ruffling of the feathers at that moment in time. Of course, there were some faithful few that did some incredible things. But for me, unless we address the fact that we have been blind in history to identify several lamb-like looking beasts, this issue will continue to persist. And I think there is a need for us to point out our own internal issues as well as talk about the things that are happening outside. Why are we so comfortable living in this country, especially as Black people? And for a good majority of our congregations, we're talking about Black middle class folks, that unless it interrupts your commerce, unless it interrupts your bank account, are unaffected.
Correct. Yep.
It is not a coincidence that a lot of our churches started off as storefront and then we end up in suburban communities. We are trying to get away from the heartbeat of what's happening. And I think theologically and spiritually, we're doing the same thing. As long as we can put some distance, as long as it's them, not us. And I think we have to make people uncomfortable with not just what's happening in the news cycle, but the fact that we have been unaffected. Where were we during the civil rights movement? What was our reaction to the
I can tell you where we were.
These are some of the things
where we weren't.
Right, where we weren't. I think there's another issue where when it comes to Trump's and his executive order, do we have a border issue? I would say yes. that has been clear. That is not a new issue.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have an immigration law problem? That's the larger conversation that I'm not hearing anyone talking about, because immigration goes beyond just our southern border. If you've been in college and you know some folks who have studied and who have gotten great degrees, who are skilled, who are knowledgeable, trying to get a job or trying to get the proper visas to come into the US, it is unnecessarily troubling, that entire process.
Yeah.
But no one is talking about
flawed. It's flawed.
no one's talking about revamping or updating our immigration laws. We're just focused on a people group. And that is the issue.
Being the only border, right? All these other borders are open and people are coming in, but the brown people from Mexico, that's where the folks.
Right. Let's talk about it in totality. Yeah. Let's address the issue. We cannot fix this if it's just
address it.
Yeah, until we address the actual issue. And let's make this equitable and equal.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of immigrants who have been subject to the poor immigration system process. There are thousands of people who have applied to have their case dealt with following the rules, but have been put on hold for so many, years, actually. And it's not their fault. They're following the rules, but they're not getting them through the immigration court and getting their papers quick enough. So there is a group of people who are just subject to a system that is not in favor of them in terms of processing.
Well, the unfortunate thing is that the Democratic Party, that professes to be the party of the poor and disenfranchised and so forth, has failed. And in failing, they, some of the people who are most rabidly opposed to immigration nowadays are immigrants themselves. I've heard, I can't tell you the number of individuals that I've heard who have immigrated from Mexico, Honduras, Ecuador, and others saying, and they will tell you, we did what we were supposed to do. We stood in line, we waited, we did everything, and these people coming in and trying to jump the line. You know what it's like, folks. When you touch all the bases and cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and somebody else takes the shortcut, you're madder than the other folks are. And then up in New York, I know Black people who were saying, look, they were keeping these folks who came into this country illegally in hotels and feeding them, and I can't feed my family.
Correct.
And so by failing to have a sane immigration policy, we have lost the support of people that once were willing to be supportive. And that's where the Republicans and Donald John Trump has stolen a march on us, because people are tired of a failure to do something.
How do you think they're feeling now, Tally? They're even putting out people who are citizens.
Well, it's not that they're putting them out, they're rounding them up. And there's a level of harassment that's going on.
You see, they're going to open up
Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah,
for thousands of immigrants to imprison them.
Well, not thousands of immigrants, thousands of undocumented individuals who supposedly have been convicted of crimes. And the truth of the matter is, most people that we deal with do not feel sorry for those people.
Right, but it's also a large number who have no criminal record.
They're not being deported. Now, they are being harassed, but they're not being deported. And so what this is aiming at, and this is where the problem lies, they're aiming at individuals who supposedly have criminal records, who have been, who have broken the law, and who are not here legally anyway. And folks are saying, you know what? Those folks ought to be gone. And truthfully speaking, they ought to be gone. However, the spirit that drives this
is the way.
Is a xenophobic spirit that says we don't give rats
I want you here.
Hip pockets about these people. I mean, look, when somebody comes from Central America, and they have to walk 1,000 miles at times and risk their lives to just find freedom, I can't find it in my heart to be upset with them for trying to be free.
I can't either.
You got a statue at its base that says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free."
Yeah.
This is the American.
We ought to give that back to the French.
We sure
Just
should.
dismantle it, put it on a ship, and send it back over to Paris. Because it doesn't.
I mean, Donald Trump is saying, "Give me your Swedish, your French."
Mm.
You're Russian.
I was wondering, you mentioned
You're Danish.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Tally. As far as I know, habeas corpus is suspended there.
At Guantanamo?
Yes.
I think you're right. I mean, and that's
which means that
Yeah.
They have no recourse legally.
Somebody's probably saying, habeas corpus, is that a sandwich? So you might want to clarify what that means. You know, the right to the legal right basically for redress when you are arrested, you know, to be able to plead your case in a court, gets suspended under certain circumstances, which is why Donald Trump is all of these exigencies he's creating. You know, we're under attack. This isn't he's not calling it illegal illegal immigration. He's calling it an invasion.
Yeah.
This is the language that allows for the justifiable suspension of habeas corpus, where you can round people up and sort them out later after they're dead, you know.
Well, I will say that, you know, there is pushback, and I think it would behoove us to see what our state is doing, other states are doing. There are attorneys general who are pushing back. I mean, there's been a plethora of lawsuits filed against these actions. So it's not like the country is taking it lying down. I mean, I've even seen a few arguments in the Senate where, you know, they're just not going to take this, you know, lying down. And the thing, you know, someone asked a question. They said, why is Donald Trump doing this and not doing this all on executive order and not following the process? What is he afraid of? He has the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
Well, and the right way to do it is to suggest or submit to the legislature
get him
these changes he wants to make, and the legislature has to vote on it. Now, if some things go through because the Republican House and Senate are in favor of him because he's Republican, they put him in office, that's one thing, but that's following the process. These executive orders are not following the process, and there are a lot of legal ramifications to it. So this is an opportunity for Americans to look at the Constitution, look at your rights, look at the process, understand what's going on, and not be fearful of the fact that a president is unilaterally making decisions that ultimately affect the outcome. I mean, the ripple effect is incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
That will be irreversible for years.
This country, even though the Biden administration did a lot of things, they have not publicized it well. But this country has garnered an appetite for direct action. In other words, the country no longer believes that the legislative process works. Just like poor people don't believe that the courts will work for them. We don't. I mean, that's why we shoot each other, you know, because if Miggs does something to me and I go to sue him, my grandchildren will probably get the result of the case. So I'm just going to go ahead and shoot him because I can't trust the courts. And the United States no longer trusts the legislative process to produce anything. So they are willing to accord Donald Trump this emperor-like power to simply rule by fiat. I pronounce this executive order to do this. And they're willing to do that until their ox gets gored. And then they cry out.
Some of them want the power. I heard this one guy says, "Oh, people have the fear of what I want to say, authoritativeness, right? They have the fear. Don't have the fear of that, you know, authoritarianism. Don't fear it, but embrace it, because now they're going to push that third term."
How we got Hitler. That's how we got Hitler. How we got Mussolini. That's how we've gotten death within the past. People are willing to surrender freedom and authority when they perceive that they are in a crisis. and that's how we get it. There's another one. If you don't mind, Latasha, there's another one that I think we need to be careful.
Please, because
and that is the one where restoring the death penalty and protecting public safety. Now, whenever you want to see what this administration is up to, check out the loftiness of the language. The more lofty the language, the more likely it is that it is fertilizer. You know, and this is restoring the death penalty and protecting public safety. It has been proven that the death penalty does not make a community or a nation safer.
Right.
But in this one, he orders the attorney general to, quote, pursue federal prosecution and the death penalty for capital crimes committed by anyone
without legal status.
Without legal status, and also commands the attorney general to resume pursuing the death penalty whenever possible, unless, of course, you happen to lead to the death of an officer of the peace on January the 6th, 2020. Those folks can walk free. But anybody else, he wants to get rid of the electric chair and buy an electric couch and just put as many on it as he possibly can.
Well, clearly we see what's
Christians
going on.
are in support of that.
Evil.
Clearly we see what's going on. The question I have is, how many of us would participate and join in a nonviolent march, program, something to not only state our position and our feelings about this, but to actively go against it? First, as individual Christians, and second, as Seventh-day Adventists and representative of a denomination in this country. How many of us would hit the street with nonviolent protests?
I'm marched from Virginia. I would march.
Folks, you don't even have to get, and I agree with Charles, and I'll walk with anybody, for only a while. I need a car to march.
After a while, you do like an e-bike or something.
You a rollator walker dude with the 4 wheels. You get to sit down.
But all you got to do, I'm telling you, folks don't realize, write a letter to your congressperson. You would be amazed at what it means when they start getting letters. These congresspeople think twice. Most of them are very facile, and they will bend in any direction that the wind is blowing. Write a letter to them. As our churches, somebody asked a few moments ago, are we afraid because of 501c3 status means that we cannot be politically involved? It is not that, and this is an area that I worked in at the top level of government. The 501c3 status does not prevent you from expressing yourself on matters of morality as it regards law and politics. It prevents you from being partisan. In other words, standing up and saying, I support this candidate. This church endorses this candidate. You can't do that. But you can definitely write a letter and say, we perceive that the giving of billions of dollars in military aid to the nation of Israel, while they are bombing these places and destroying innocent lives in the process, is something we cannot support. You can do that. You can say that I think that President Donald Trump is acting out of xenophobia and shameless self-interest in X, Y, and Z. You can say those things.
So Tally, my social media posts don't count?
Social media posts do count. They count that, but it doesn't count as much as expending a little bit of big ink on a page and putting, how much, I don't even know what a stamp costs now, putting a stamp on it and mailing it. I mean, but social media does count.
Okay. I was both and. You're saying do both. So if you're going to put it on social media, put it in the form of a letter. Send it.
Just if you're too tired to write and if you got a cramp in your finger, pick up the phone and say, I am a constituent of Congressman Pitty Poe Jones,
and I voted for you.
I voted for you, and I am not pleased with X, Y, and Z. Please record my
Okay.
Yeah, any of those things work. Do it as a church.
Do we know what conscious and social justice organization is speaking out about this? Does anyone know? I know recently, I think they had a live stream a few days ago.
Friday night.
I've seen it, but I was wondering if they could deal with this and help us to navigate this.
Repairers of the Breach is very active in this. Live Free, which is national, started in Oakland, California, I believe, but it is now national. Live Free is very active in this. The organization Power in the state of Pennsylvania is very active in this. There was one. Immigration here in the city of Philadelphia. There's a group called Junta that is very, very active for immigration rights, and there are a couple of different organizations, but they're out there, and we can put a list together. But I'm preaching at West next week. I was going to preach one sermon, but my first elder got in line in front of me, and the Holy Ghost gave him my sermon. I'm talking to you, David Gordon, took my sermon.
Oh, he preached.
So now I'm preaching another sermon, and I'm going to be calling us out for our inactivity,
Oh, we got to share that one.
Yeah.
For sure. But before we go, because I know we're a little over our time, I know one of the major things too that caused a big ripple was for a lot of the federal employees. Several individuals that I know who work for the government received what they referred to as an aggressive letter, encouraging them to take this buyout of, just quit and you'll be paid through September. And, initially some people are like, oh, that sounds like a great deal. They should take it. And then when you dig a little deeper, you realize, just as we said before, there's no guarantee that will happen. There are other things that happen when you quit in terms of that role or that job going away forever. And so there's a lot of stuff that is causing angst for a lot of our people, even within alienees, even within our constituents, our churches, our people. And for me, I think this is where it's really starting to hit home for individuals who are fearful of losing their jobs, who have worked for the government for years and, plan to retire. And now they're suddenly, adjusting to all of these things happening at once.
But they don't have to leave. I understand that it's the threat of the government making it hard for them to stay. I mean, you may be up to a lot of harassment, but they don't have to leave.
Right now. Right?
Yeah, I think there's a unusual push happening right now where we're turning a lot of government jobs into almost like a politically powered, situation. And so they're looking for ways to make sure that they can have a certain level of control that wasn't there. And I find that really, I shouldn't say this odd, for someone that has a brain constructed like Donald Trump, and a worldview shaped like his, having absolute control, even in our system, is normal. And so they are looking for ways to influence and to push certain things that I think are very uncomfortable. And it's odd to me, well, I should say that. I think I'm uncomfortable with the fact that you want to be president of the United States, but you're willing to displace thousands of people who are working for you, who want to work for the federal government in that process. It doesn't make sense that we would be like comfortable with doing this while wanting to be president of the United States. Listen, be president of your party.
But that's an agenda. He wants to. Remember, they've been saying they're going to get rid of all the government. So they're trying to get rid of all the employees. So then he can put whomever he wants to put in that will agree and push his agenda forward.
It's also odd that Elon Musk is at the forefront of this, where Tesla has gotten a lot of government contracts that has helped them to become the profitable company that they are. So are we going to take that back now? Are we going to require Tesla to pay us all back, we the people, for all the money that we've spent to help propel and to help their business? It's I think it's foolish to me.
It has been misattributed to the philosopher Sun Tzu, the saying that an evil man will burn down his nation to rule over the ashes. Donald Trump.
Mercy.
Deep there, Tally. That's deep.
All right, we can have prayer now.
Mm.
I mean, he is willing to. I mean, sending out letters telling people to quit. Suppose everybody in the Defense Department quit,
Right.
or the Justice Department quit,
Right.
and you had nothing but ashes. But Donald Trump would be happy with that.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, he's
Because
firing a lot of them now.
Yeah,
Any person who had anything to do with January 6th, even if they just did a letter, they typed the letter. Everybody, they want you to have to fire them.
This is a call for us to become active. This is not a call for us to become frightened or to become anxious. It is a call for us to become active, not in the way that our enemies are active, but in the spirit of Christ, learning like Mary and Buddy did, learning how to stand boldly and affirmatively and gently in the face of that which is evil, and to decry it with a voice that pleads for mercy. And it's time for us to do this.
Woo.
Well, the question is, what would Jesus do if he were experiencing this along with us? What do you think Jesus would do, knowing his personality, his ministry?
Throw those tables around, Chuck.
You know what?
Knock those tables out of the way.
Straight. The
way things are now, he might get handcuffed.
The only time Jesus ever acted in a manner that was not in keeping with the gentle demeanor that we're accustomed to is when people in power, oppressed individuals, were simply trying to find their way. I mean, when he went into the temple, it was in the outer court where that was the only place the Gentiles could go. And where women could go. I mean, these were people who had no place. They were disenfranchised. But the people had taken up all that space so they could make money by selling the animals. That's when the Lord said, this is supposed to be a house of prayer for all people, and you turned it into this. The other time was when in Matthew 23, where he just cut loose and started talking about people's mama. You generation of vipers. I mean, in other words, you a snake, your mama a snake, and your daddy is a snake. I mean, that was the only time he ever got there. And that was because he said they bind up heavy burdens and put it on people, and they wouldn't lift it with their own finger. They stop people from going into the kingdom of heaven. They're not going in themselves. They won't let other people in. The only time he ever did it was when people of power oppressed people.
That's right.
Who were simply trying to find their way.
And we're followers of Jesus, right?
That's right.
We
should hate injustice.
So we should hate the things he hates, right?
Oh yeah.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Mercy. Yeah. Thank you guys for this conversation. And
well, go ahead. Finish it, Tasha.
It's very.
You're the one that keeps the
and we need to keep a lot of these matters in prayer, because there are some very disturbed individuals that are afraid for their lives and for their futures.
And just think, Chuck, this 120 days, the agenda will move because he will have every person that he wants to have in his executive cabinet. And then he will be able to do whatever he wants to do because he has the power then to do so.
Not if we stand up. Not when years ago, 4.5, 5 years now ago, I was introduced to a family that was living in the First United Methodist Church here in Germantown in Philadelphia. They were living there because the Trump government decided that after 14 years, they had bought a house, sent children to school, paid taxes. They decided that they wanted to send these people back home. After 14 years, government, just not doing what it should have done. And this family ran into this church to hide, because at that time, sanctuary laws would not allow ICE to come in and take them out of the church. They
and that has changed now, right?
They're repealing it now. But they lived in that church for over 2.5 years.
Wow.
And we supported them. We came today, we supported them. We supported them in every way we could. That family now are members of the West Philadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Amen. Amen.
Because standing for justice draws people. We need to do that.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
I agree to that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys for having this discussion. It's a tough one, but I think we've heard the clarion call. Stand up, say something, do something.
I didn't say much, but I do want to say one line. We all have a choice to make, whether we will be a chaplain to the empire or whether we will be prophets of resistance. And so, what will you be?
Prophet of resistance.
Can't nobody say it better with fewer words than one.
Thank you. I love that.
Yeah, I see that low cut gospel. I saw that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's novella.
I just heard that today. Yeah. Oh,
Wow.
okay.
This is just the beginning. So thank you for having this dialogue. Next week we know it's Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to the Eagles next week?
Well, the Bible's
They're going to win this year. They're going to win this year.
They shall mount up with wings. As
Are their wings getting clipped?
Yeah. The only time I saw a chief, it was followed by of sinners.
Oh,
That's
So,
here we go.
are you suggesting that it's a prophetic that the Eagles will?
I have a dream.
I saw your post, by the way.
Oh, you saw that one?
It was hilarious. It was hilarious.
No, so yeah, we'll still be here. We'll still be here next Sunday.
We'll be here.
Yeah, we'll be here. So we'll be here after the game or before. What time does it usually start? Before the game.
The game doesn't start till about 7:30.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this will be your pregame show. So join us next week. We're actually going to be answering your questions about, this is a month of love. It's Black History Month, but this is also what we call the Love Month. So we're going to be answering your questions about love. So if you have some you want us to address, we're talking about whether it's dating, whether it's marriage, divorce, marriage after divorce, anything. We're willing to talk about it all. So
if you need Miggs to leave a voice mail for your special someone,
price is half off at the moment, but
yeah.
Oh, mercy.
All right,
but yeah. All right. So we'll see you back here next week. Thanks for watching, guys.
Take care, everybody.
Blessed week, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.